In this video, we're going to go over the concepts of cell specialization. So, cell specialization is the reason why we have so many different types of cells in the body. This video will explore how cell specialization occurs, different types of specialized cells, and go through some examples of how some specific cells turn into other types of cells. So let's go ahead and follow along with the handout that you were provided. You can use that handout um, as a guide for this lesson. You'll see there's a variety of different questions that are asked, and you can answer the questions by going through the slide deck or watching this video. So here we have a cell, and I went through the cell cycle and made two new daughter cells. After those daughter cells have gone through the cell cycle, or after that cell has produced the daughter cells, I should say, there's sort of three paths that they could take. The two new daughter cells could stay in the cell cycle and just make more cells. That's one option. They could also go into what's called a rest phase, called G0, meaning they exit the cell cycle and they don't really stop working there, they just stop dividing. And instead of dividing, what they do is they become specialized. So they become a specific type of cell, and then they do a specific job in your body for the remainder of their life. And that's what most of the cells in your body are. So most cells in our body are in the stage where they're actually specialized, and we'll talk about this in more detail in this lesson. Another pathway that they could sometimes do is something called apoptosis. It's called programmed cell death. So if one of the cells, let's say, was damaged, there was a mutation in the DNA, some damage in the DNA, instead of letting it continue to make more damaged cells and potentially lead to cancer, it might just trigger a signal that causes it to basically destroy itself, and that's called apoptosis. So that way, it doesn't spread the damage that was in the DNA. So again, our focus is going to be the G0 phase, looking at cell specialization in this lesson. So we are multicellular organisms. And multicellular organisms, they require specialized cells because they're so complex and there's so many different tasks to do. They need specialists to do a variety of different jobs. So a specialized cell is a cell that has a very specific job in an organism. And once the cell has become specialized, what's interesting is that they actually lose the ability to divide or regenerate. Before they were specialized, they could regenerate really, 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 really easily. But once they're specialized, they kind of lose that ability. It's sort of like, think of it like if think about yourself when you're in kindergarten, when you're a very young child, you have a lot of potential to do whatever you want. And so you can, you go to high school, maybe you study sciences, you study technology, you study humanities. You have so much potential to become whatever you want. But eventually, as you age, you keep aging, you go to university, college, the trades, whatever, you start to specialize and go into specific fields. And now you have less room to go into other fields. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that in general, the more you specialize, the more you are focusing on one specific task and the less you can do other things. And so for specialized cells, that's the idea. They become specialized, so they're just focusing on a specific task, and they no longer make more of themselves. They no longer really divide. They just want to focus on the work that you're doing. So the process by which a cell becomes specialized is called cell specialization, also called differentiation. To become different, to become specialized. And like I said, once a cell is specialized, it doesn't do mitosis anymore. And that's why, for example, if you damage certain specialized cells in your body, they're damaged permanently. So your nerve cells in your spinal cord, if you damage your spinal cord, you can't really heal that because the nerve cells are specialized. They don't divide and make more of themselves. This differs from cell to cell, but the idea is still that the more specialized you are, the less you can make of yourself. Some examples of specialized cells in animals, like skin cells, brain cells, lung cells. In plants, there's also specialized cells too. So here's an example of a specialized cell as well. We'll take a look at those specialized cells in more detail soon. So one of the most important concepts when it comes to cell specialization is the idea that structure supports function. So here you have a funnel. And the function, the job of this funnel, function means job, is to basically allow you to pour liquids into a narrow opening like a bottle. So what allows the funnel to be good at this job? What structure allows it to be good at the job? Well, first of all, there's a narrow or small end over here that allows you to fit this into a bottle. So that structure allows you to fit it into a narrow opening. And then the other part of the structure is that there's a wide mouth over here that allows you to pour liquid without really spilling much. So the structure of this funnel, what it looks like, how it's made, basically it makes it good at its function. And it's the same idea with specialized cells. If a specialized cell has a specific job to do, well, you would hope that it would have the specific tools to do that job. So, as I mentioned, there's many different types of cells in the body, over 300 different types of cells that exist. And they have sort of different structures. And the reason they have different structures is because those different structures allow them to do their different jobs. And we'll take a look at some specific examples as well. Here we see some red blood cells. Here we see some skin cells, bone cells over here. These are skeletal muscle cells, fat cells, nerve cells, hair cells in the ear. And notice that their function is described over here. So red blood cells to carry oxygen delivered throughout the body and remove carbon dioxide. Skin cells to cover the body's surface and to reduce water loss. Bone cells will store calcium and help you to build new bone. Muscle cells, they contract to allow you to move. The fat cells will store fat so you can use it for energy later on. Nerve cells are very long, and so they conduct electrical signals throughout the body, and they're good at doing that because they have a lot of branches and they're very long. And these hair cells over here in the ear, they basically they move and they detect vibrations, and that's what you perceive as sound. But these are just some different examples of specialized cells in your body. And what I want you to notice is that they all have different jobs and they all have different functions as a result of that. And what I meant to say there is they all have different jobs, which means they have different functions, but they all have different structures to support those different jobs. So here we can see some examples. Here we have some heart muscle cells, and they're specialized to really contract and beat together. And so you can see this is their structure that allows them to do that. They're connected over here in a certain way that allows the muscle cells to contract together within the heart. Here we have the hair cells within the inner ear that allow you to detect sound. And so what do they have? Well, they have these special stringy organelles called cilia, and they're basically little hairs, and they vibrate and detect those vibrations so that we can perceive them as sound. So in your notes, you have a table where you can write out some examples of specialized cells. You can describe their function and their structure. And that's what you're going to be doing as we go through the slides in this video for now. So we can look at fat cells. And fat cells, another special name for them is called adipocytes. And basically, as you can see, they have this really big organelle in them, like a big vacuole. And that's where they can store all the fat. So their function is really to store fat molecules so you can conserve energy and use it later on, chemical energy. And what they have is very large vacuoles and reservoirs, little storage areas, to allow them to store more fat. So that's a structure that allows them to do their function. Here we have a white blood cell. A white blood cell is one of 3 blood cells that exist. The white blood cell's job or function is to basically destroy bad things that enter your body, like bacteria. Not all bacteria are bad, but when there are bad bacteria, the white blood cell will basically sort of grab it with its membrane, bring it in, and then destroy it with its lysosomes, and then kind of spit it out. And you can get rid of these parts or use these parts to do other things. But the point is that in order to do its job, the white blood cell needs a lot of lysosomes. So you'll see that that's kind of the structure. There's other parts of the structure, but one of the major parts of it is that it has lots of lysosomes in order to do the function of destroying dangerous bacteria that enter your body. Here you can see a nerve cell, also called a neuron. Nerve cells, their job is to conduct electrical signals all over the body, just to coordinate all your movements and other activities in your body. And their structure that allows them to do that is that they're very long and thin. And the long allows them to connect to other cells throughout the body. They have many branches, so they can connect to many cells, and so that makes them really good communicators to other types of neurons in the body. And so here you can see the neuron cell, the nerve cell. You can see it has all a bunch of organelles in here, just like a typical cell would have, but that structure is quite different from other cells that you've seen. Here we have a sperm. So a reproductive cell, a gamete, um, and its function is basically that it's a gamete and it needs to move throughout its environment to reach the egg to reproduce. And so to do that movement, there's a specialized structure that allows that sperm to work well. And so first of all, it has this long tail called a flagellum. That's a tail. And then also in this region here, there's a lot of mitochondria that basically can do cellular respiration to release energy to allow that tail to move so it can go towards the egg. But again, it's a specialized cell. It has a special job and it has a structure that allows us to do that job. Over here, we have specialized cells called goblet cells. Goblet cells are in your respiratory tract, so the breathing tract. And here we have the goblet cells. You'll notice that they have these little hairs, these little cilia. And these cilia, what they can do is they can kind of sweep any dust and dirt and bacteria that come into your lungs. Before they come in, they can sweep them back up. But another cool feature is that these cells produce a lot of mucus. So they trap the bacteria first before they can get down and then sweep them out. So their structure that allows them to do their job, which is basically getting rid of bad stuff and preventing it from getting to your lungs, is that they have cilia and they can also produce mucus. And to produce mucus, what they need is they need a lot of protein producing organelles like rough endoplasmic reticulum, the ER, the rough ER with ribosomes and Golgi body, because they're all involved in making proteins. So function is basically to make mucus and sweep things out of your respiratory tract to prevent them from going to your lungs. And the structure that allows them to do that is the cilia and all these little organelles that work in protein production, because mucus is made up of a lot of protein components. So that was a lot of specialized cells in animals. There's also specialized cells in plants because plants are multicellular organisms as well. And so photosynthetic cells, they are specialized cells in plants, and their job is to do photosynthesis. They basically gather energy from the sun, take some CO2, take some water, and produce glucose, and so that way we can consume that food later on. But to do this process, they need a lot of a certain organelle. Maybe you can guess what it is. You can kind of see it in this picture. Here are different cells. This is plant cell, like these are all plant cells. Here's the organelle that they need a lot of to do that photosynthesis. And if you guess chloroplast, that's right. Chloroplast is the organelle they need to do that function. This is a section of a leaf over here. And so you can see there's a variety of different types of cells here that exist in the leaf. But a lot of the cells here contain those chloroplasts to allow them to do photosynthesis. Here's another specialized leaf cell. So we have a guard cell over here. And so the function of the guard cell is basically to control the water loss. So there's a little hole over here, and that's basically where gases can enter and leave the leaf. And so if this is open, a lot of water can get out and the plant can get dehydrated. But if it's closed, water basically stays in. And so this needs to open and close at different times, depending on whether depending on whether the plant needs certain gases or not. So how does this work? Well, basically these guard cells on the side here, they basically fill up with water and release water to open and close this little pore over here. So they kind of expand and shrink to open and close this hole here to allow for different gases and water to enter and leave the cell. So the way that basically works is they have specialized membranes that allow for water and different ions to kind of leave and enter to control the opening and closing of that portion there. The main idea is that you have specialized plant cells. Some of them do photosynthesis. Some of them will regulate the opening of this little stoma, this little hole here, to regulate how much water is coming in or leaving, and same thing with gases like CO2 and oxygen. And they all have specialized structures to allow them to do that. Another type of specialized plant cell is called the xylem. And so the xylem is a special tissue, a special group of cells that basically is responsible for transporting water throughout the plant. So when water goes throughout the plant, it's traveling through xylem tissue, which is made up of xylem cells. And so, because you want the water to be able to move through kind of unobstructed without anything getting in the way, xylem cells actually have no organelles. They've lost all their organelles. They have very rigid walls. But the fact that they have no organelles means that the water can go through without being obstructed, without bumping into anything. Xylem cells are also very elongated, and that makes sense because water has to travel long distances to make its way from the roots all the way up to the leaves. Um, and again, the reason we want to go from the roots to the leaves is because that's where photosynthesis will take place, where you have a lot of photosynthetic cells. Xylem cells, very long, no organelles. That makes the function of allowing water to move throughout the plant a lot easier. The process of water being transported from roots to plants and throughout the plant is called transpiration. So that was a variety of different types of cells that we saw, different types of specialized cells in both animals and plants. Hopefully, you recorded those in your note table, and you remember some examples of specialized cells. So if I ask you for an example, can you give me one? Can you tell me the structure of that cell? Can you tell me how the structure supports the function of that cell as well? So one of our other topics we're going to visit is, where do all those specialized cells come from? And what I want you to remember is that all the cells in your body basically started off from the same zygote. Um, and that zygote essentially became a few unspecialized cells called stem cells. So stem cells are unspecialized cells, and they can actually become anything they want. Because they're so unspecialized, they can specialize and become a variety of different types of cells. So stem cells can basically do two things. They can divide and make new stem cells, or they could stop dividing and start to specialize to make all the different types of specialized cells that are in your body. And so a lot of those specialized cells, where do they come from? Well, they came from those stem cells that your zygote produced when you were first made. And we also have some stem cells left in our body, just not a lot, unfortunately, because most of our cells in our body are specialized. So let's go into a little bit more detail about stem cells. This is all I expect you to really know about them. There's three different types of stem cells, and they differ in their degree of how specialized they are. So the more specialized a stem cell is, the less type of cells it can make. The least specialized stem cell is called a totipotent stem cell. So here you can see the sperm and the egg. They make the zygote. And so when that zygote is first made and those first few cells are made through division, those cells are totipotent stem cells. That basically means they can become anything they want to make. They can even make cells of the placenta. They can make any type of cell, okay, because they're the least specialized. They have so many options now. They didn't really, pay for a degree in something and then spend years doing it yet. They just started out their life, so they can become anything. But then over time, as these totipotent cells divide, they become a little bit more specialized. They're still stem cells, but they're a bit more specialized than before. They're called pluripotent at this point, and they could make most type of cells if they wanted to. The only cells they can't make anymore because they're a bit more specialized are the placenta cells. And basically, these exist after the zygote has divided a bit more. When the zygote exists as a structure called a blastocyst, then your stem cells are pluripotent stem cells. So after more division, eventually your cells become even more specialized. They're not fully specialized yet. They're still stem cells. But basically, whatever stem cells sort of remain, they're called multipotent stem cells. And so multipotent, because they're a bit more specialized, they can only produce certain types of specialized cells, certain lines of them. And they usually produce specialized cells in the organ where they kind of reside. And so the stem cells that you have in your body right now, they're multipotent. That's why there's a lot of there's a lot of parts in your body that if you damage them, you can't regenerate them, because we don't have a lot of these totipotent ones or pluripotent ones anymore in our body. And so they can't regenerate unlimited amounts in different types of cells. We only have this. And so we can only make specific type of cells because this is a little bit too specialized to really become anything it wants. So that's called multipotent stem cells. And this is most of the stem cells in our body that exist. And so this is basically where we're going to regenerate a lot of our specialized cells, but this cannot regenerate all the specialized cells. This is just a summary of what I mentioned. Totipotent, pluripotent, multipotent. Think totipotent as total potential, can make anything, including placenta. Pluripotent is not total potential, but it's quite a lot. Pluri, quite a bit, except for placenta. And multipotent, well, again, a little bit more specialized. It can make some specialized cells, but only within the organ where those cells are found. And we'll take a look at an example. So, why do we care about stem cells? There's a great video I want you to watch here. So, just briefly, I want you to understand the idea behind it. Stem cells, if we can learn how to kind of control them, we could use them to make specialized cells to replace some of our damaged tissue that we can't normally replace because, well, we can't replace specialized cells in our body. So, if we could harvest stem cells and give them signals to say, hey, this person needs new nerve cells, become nerve cells, well, maybe one day we can fix paralysis from someone who has spinal damage. Maybe one day we can treat Alzheimer's disease or certain heart disease that can't be cured because we can't make the cells anymore. Or stroke patients can have a cure. Maybe Parkinson's disease can be solved. Or maybe people who can't fix their pancreas, well, we can make new pancreatic cells. Or we can make new skin cells to replace very, very severe burns where there was also nerve damage, new nerve cells there. So the idea of stem cells is that maybe we can use it in regenerative medicine, which means to regenerate specific parts. We can also maybe use it to study development and disease. So if we watch stem cells become specific type of cells, then we can understand how development works, how disease works. There is some controversy with stem cells, though, and that's normal in science. Whenever there's something that sounds good, you also have to think of, what are the negatives, what are the cons, because you have to approach things with a balanced perspective. Otherwise, a lot of things could go wrong and become unethical. Some controversy is, where are those stem cells coming from if we decide to use them? Do we have to take embryos? Do we have to take basically undeveloped babies to make that? And if we do, is that ethical? What if people start using stem cells in unauthorized and unlicensed clinics? There could be a lot of side effects, and there actually are. There's a lot of clinics that are run where people are trying these treatments out. They don't have proper degrees, they don't have proper training, and they're actually harming people. So it's a lot of things that we have to regulate and watch before we can fully use a new tool in science. But there's a lot of promise. There's a lot of studies that show there's a lot of promise here. And if you're really interested in this and understanding more and learning more, you can watch this video here to learn about stem cells in a bit more detail and some of their awesome applications. So let's go into, well, okay, how does a stem cell sort of become a specialized cell? Here's the interesting thing. All the different types of cells in your body, or the majority, actually have the same DNA. So in your body, a neuron and its epithelial cell will actually have the same DNA, because if you think about it, they came from the same parent, right? Zygote made all the cells. They're all clones of each other with some minor mutations here and there. Um, but but they all actually have the same DNA. So how did they become so different? How did they have such different structures and therefore functions? Well, it's basically because your body sends signals or to different cells, depending on where they are, to become different types of cells. And those signals essentially control genes. So a signal will be sent to this cell to say, hey, turn on the neuron genes and leave the other genes off and become a neuron. And a signal would be sent to this cell here and say, hey, turn on the epithelial cell genes and leave the other ones off so you can become an epithelial cell. So they all have the same sets of genes. They're all the same DNA, but it's just that they get different signals to turn on and off certain genes to become a specific type of cell. Think of it like if you had a set of Lego blocks. I gave everyone in the class the same exact set of Lego blocks, but I gave you different instructions. For some of you, I said, hey, build a unicorn, build a pony, build a castle. So even though you all have the same set of Lego blocks, I'm giving you different instructions to follow with that set. And that's kind of what's happening here. So stem cells in your body, with exceptions, of course, for the most part, will have the same DNA, and what determines what they become, what determines what type of specialized cell they becomes is which signals they get to turn on which specific genes. And so you can learn more about this in upper year biology courses. It's a really interesting field of study. So you don't have to memorize this picture here, but basically here you have a stem cell, and the idea is that if you have a certain signal received, well, you can become one of these type of specialized cells. Whereas if you don't have that signal received, you might become this type of specialized cell instead. So depending on the signal that a stem cell receives, it can become a different type of specialized cell. But they would all have the same DNA because they come from the same cell. So we're going to finish off with a case study, the red blood cell. We're going to just take a look at the structure and function of the red blood cell and then see how it becomes a red blood cell. You don't have to memorize the whole process of that. I just want to show you that there's actually like a process of transformation happening here for a stem cell to turn into a specific red blood cell. So the blood is a connective tissue, and it has many different types of cells in it. There's white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. And the one we're going to focus on right now is the red blood cell because we already saw the white blood cell. So the red blood cell is responsible for carrying oxygen and delivering it throughout the body, and then also removing CO2. But we're going to focus on the oxygen function. So what structure allows the red blood cell to do that? Well, first of all, it contains hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is like a special magnet for oxygen. It can carry oxygen, so that makes it good at its function. It's also very smooth and pretty flexible. And why is that good for its function? Well, the red blood cell has to move through small blood vessels, and so the fact that it's smooth and flexible means it can easily pass through blood vessels and fit through even the smallest blood vessels. It also has a little depression in the center and a flat surface, and that just allows it to carry more oxygen. And also, there's no nucleus. When the red blood cell forms from a stem cell, there's a step where the stem cell just kind of spits out its nucleus, and that basically just makes more room for hemoglobin, this molecule here, to be carried on the red blood cell. So the structure truly does support the function of carrying oxygen. Okay, how is a red blood cell made? So the birth of a red blood cell, RBC's red blood cell. All your blood cells will actually come from stem cells called multipotent stem cells. You don't have to know this big word here. Just know multipotent stem cells make your red blood cells. And they come from this part in your bone called bone marrow. And so essentially, when you want to make red blood cells, you get a certain signal, and then a pathway would be followed to make the red blood cells. Different signals in your bone marrow would make different types of cells. So some signals would make white blood cells, some signals would make platelets. But the special name for the production of red blood cells from bone marrow is called erythropoiesis. And so we'll quickly take a look at that pathway that goes from multipotent stem cell to specialized red blood cell. You don't have to memorize this. Again, it's just showing you have a stem cell, it gets a signal, and it can become a variety of different types of cells depending on the signal that it gets. We're going to focus on the red blood cell process. Here we have it. This is the red blood cell formation. So you have a multipotent stem cell in the bone marrow, and that will get a signal. And so once it gets a signal, it starts this transformation to become the red blood cell. And so basically the red blood cell, why does it have to kind of be reproduced all the time? That's because it really only survives about 120 days. And once it destroys itself or it's damaged enough and it can no longer be used, we need to make more. The red blood cell itself can't divide and make more of itself. So that's why you need the multipotent stem cell to do that. And so the transformations we usually see is that as we go from the stem cell to the red blood cell, we see a decrease in the size. The nucleus basically starts to condense and kind of destroy itself. There's production of hemoglobin so you can carry oxygen. And then eventually there's this process called enucleation where the nucleus is spat out. So now you have a lot of room for more hemoglobin as well. And so those are just some steps in the transformation of a multipotent stem cell all the way to its red blood cell when we decide to make it. So again, you don't have to memorize that whole process. If you just want a better visual of how red blood cell production works, you can watch this video as well, especially if you're interested in the idea of differentiation. So that was a video on cell specialization. You saw different types of specialized cells. You saw where specialized cells come from. You saw different types of stem cells. You saw an example of a specific specialized cell becoming a specialized cell from its stem cell that exists. And so you should be able to give examples of specialized cells, explain the idea that they all have the same DNA, but that they just have different genes turned on or off, and explain the idea that cells undergo a transformation when they get the signal from your body to become a specialized cell. And so using this video and the slide deck, you can fill out the handout and you'll become a pro at cell specialization.